Okay, let's unpack this stack of sources and really dive deep.
Yeah, there's a lot here.
What we've got is just a fascinating mix of material, everything from high-level political strategy, national events.
Right down to the incredibly personal, on-the-ground experiences.
Exactly. People volunteering for a major American political party. And the core theme that seems to run through all of it is these, dramatic shifts happening within the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. In the run-up to the 2022 midterms.
And how differently those changes played out, depending on where you were standing.
It's quite a collection. We have these strategic blueprints, like this one plan aiming to win from the ground up.
Yeah.
Sitting right alongside accounts of, deeply felt personal betrayals and, frankly, ideological purges within local party structures.
And through it all, we also see the cultural elements and this intense focus on election administration really taking shape.
Definitely.
So that's what we want to capture. Our mission for this deep dive is really to extract the most important nuggets, the key insights from this material for you.
Connect the dots, basically.
Yeah, connect the dots between that top-down strategy and the bottom-up transformation happening locally.
What were the forces behind it?
What did these shifts feel like for the people involved, and what did they mean for the broader political landscape?
It's a complex picture.
Get ready, because these sources, they reveal some pretty surprising facts and paint pictures of, very different realities coexisting within the same party.
And these sources really help illuminate the various forces at play in that specific moment, showing us not just what happened, but how it was experienced.
Right. So let's start where the sources do, kind of at the strategic level, looking at some of the thinking for the 2022 cycle.
Okay.
A key figure highlighted here is Dan Schultz and his precinct strategy.
Yes. Schultz's idea, as it's presented in the sources, was, deceptively simple, but potentially revolutionary.
How so?
Take over the party from the ground up.
Right.
Recruit precinct committee men, PCs. His belief was that if enough committed people, loyal to his vision, filled these lowest level party spots,
they could control things.
They could control local party committees, influence nominations, party direction, all from the inside.
But as the source material describes it, Schultz knew he couldn't do this alone, not on a national scale.
No way. He needed a huge platform, a major messenger.
And according to the account, he needed Donald Trump.
And Trump, throughout 2021, he was very deliberately positioning himself.
Yeah.
For a potential comeback, right?
He'd survived the Senate impeachment trial.
Yep. And key Republican figures, material notes, were making these conciliatory visits down to Mar-a-Lago.
Right. And events like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, Glenn Youngkin's win in Virginia, that seemed to give him fresh momentum.
It did.
The sources also point out he was sitting on, $100 million in PAC money?
A huge amount. Much of it raised explicitly promising to fight the stolen 2020 election.
And he was back, holding those signature mega rallies. The account describes his plans for revenge, starting with the House Republicans who voted to impeach him after January 6th.
And his main tool for reasserting control over the party, as this material details, was endorsements, specifically in the 2022 primaries.
Oh, yeah. The sources describe candidates practically falling over themselves to get his blessing.
We read about Ohio Senate candidates holding a private debate just for Trump at his golf club.
Which the source suggests felt like something out of The Apprentice
or even The Hunger Games. A bit intense.
That's one way to put it. And in Pennsylvania, rivals for a Senate seat spent huge sums.
Their own money.
Just hiring former Trump advisors, hoping it would buy them an endorsement.
The material says the going rate for this lobbying was like $10,000 a month. One consultant apparently pulled in $200,000.
And didn't even deliver the endorsement.
Yep, didn't get it.
But the sources make it crystal clear that hiring the right people wasn't the main thing.
Not at all. The candidates understood there was one key thing they absolutely positively had to do.
They had to talk about the rigged and stolen election.
That was the price of admission, basically.
And because this became the main requirement, the sources note, Trump ended up backing a lot of first-time candidates.
People often with backgrounds outside traditional politics.
We read about Blake Masters in Arizona, former aide to Peter Thiel, making campaign videos shooting guns.
And calling the Unabomber an underrated thinker.
Yeah.
Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, a state senator who was a regular on Steve Bannon's War Room while trying to overturn the 2020 electors. Tudor Dixon in Michigan hosted a show on the same streaming channel as War Room.
And a congressional candidate in North Carolina who attended the January 6th rally faced accusations of domestic violence.
These candidates, weren't necessarily the types traditional Republican pros had a ton of confidence in.
No, but the source points out that 2022 offered Republicans massive historical advantages.
Absolutely. Unpopular Democratic president, crippling inflation.
Newly gerrymandered districts favoring the GOP leads in voter registration enthusiasm.
In that kind of environment, the thinking presented in the material was, well, they could afford to run some candidates who might be considered weaker, maybe unorthodox by traditional standards.
And still win.
And still win comfortably in the general election because the political climate was just so favorable.
Right. Okay, so back to Dan Schultz. He desperately wanted Trump to endorse his precinct strategy.
He really did. He imagined Trump asking a rally crowd, how many of you are PCs?
The sources detail his various attempts asking the Arizona GOP for help, thinking about ads in the Wall Street Journal.
Even considering flying a banner over Mar-a-Lago that said precinctstrategy.com for DJT.
Wow.
The breakthrough, as the source tells it, actually came through Steve Stern.
The flag shirt salesman Bannon found?
That's the one. A kind of circuitous connection through Jexit, this organization encouraging Jewish Americans to leave the Democratic Party.
Okay.
It eventually led to Stern having lunch at Mar-a-Lago in December 2021.
And the account describes Trump walking in fresh off the golf course.
Chats with someone in the group.
And Stern manages to get a word in, asks Trump about the precinct strategy.
And Trump, the source says, indicated he didn't know about it, but invited Stern to set up an appointment.
Which, in true Trump world fashion, as described in the sources...
didn't immediately happen.
Right. The material notes there were official channels, unofficial channels. They often didn't sync up smoothly.
So Stern and Schultz kept working connections, doing interviews, like an hour-long one with Mike Lindell.
Who promised to talk to Trump directly.
Yep. Finally, Steve Bannon arranged a conference call with Liz Harrington.
Who'd worked for War Room and joined Trump's small team, kind of a key liaison to the MAGAverse.
Right. And the sources even note that some of Trump's core political advisors at the time hadn't even heard about this whole precinct strategy lobbying effort.
Interesting.
After that call, Dan Schultz drafted a short statement, basically written in Trump's voice.
And the sources state that Stern and Dan, they never actually got their appointment, never heard Trump say he fully understood the strategy.
But the statement, it was eventually blasted out to his millions of followers.
And here's the key line from that statement, as described in the source voiced by Trump. Just heard about an incredible effort underway that will strengthen the Republican Party. If members of our great movement start getting involved, that means you becoming a precinct committeeman for your voting precinct, we can take back our great country from the ground up, make America great again.
And that simple statement, coming from the very top, it put the strategic focus squarely on the lowest level of the party structure for a huge number of supporters.
Okay, so we've seen the top-down strategy, the directive to get involved locally, and the demand for candidates to embrace the rigged and stolen election narrative to get those endorsements.
Right.
Now, let's shift gears completely. Let's look at how this played out on the ground as described in this material.
This is where you really see the internal conflict, the transformation happening in real time, affecting individuals very deeply.
A powerful example from the sources is Sally Grubbs. She was the chairwoman of the Cobb County Republican Party in Georgia.
And her story really unfolds around the first anniversary of January 6th.
Which was a time when, the House committee was actively investigating, hundreds of rioters were being prosecuted.
And Trump was publicly calling them patriots, political prisoners, even mentioning Ashley Babbitt, who was shot that day.
So Sally, in Cobb County, planned a local event. The announcement, according to the source, read, Cobb GOP commemorates January 6, 2021 anniversary with candlelight vigil for J6 prisoners.
That announcement immediately drew media attention and intense backlash.
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a headline calling it a Cobb homage to treason, quoted a Democratic state representative saying a group of far-right activists would lionize the insurrectionists.
Sally's reaction, as described in the source, was, well, it was strong and complex. She hated being called far-right.
Questioned when beliefs like limited government and God became extreme.
Right, but she also realized her word choice was wrong. Remembers would have been better than commemorates.
She tried to explain her intention was just to acknowledge lives lost, pray for those denied justice.
The source clarifies she meant people like Ashley Babbitt and Roseanne Boylan, who died on January 6th. though it does mention Boylan's family saying she was radicalized by QAnon, which Sally didn't believe.
Crucially, the source points out that by those who have been denied justice, Sally was referring to people held in pre-trial detention.
Following standard legal procedures.
But this was being portrayed very differently, as a political cause celeb, a narrative of systemic injustice, on platforms where she got her news.
Like War Room.
She tried to clarify her intentions to the press, stating they weren't condoning violence or glorifying what happened.
But it wasn't salvageable, really, in the public eye. Seeing how it was characterized, she encouraged members to pray on their own, and the vigil was canceled.
And the source notes Trump also ended up canceling his own Jan 6th event around the same time. Used a similar explanation about the fake news media.
The personal toll on Sally from this, according to the source, was significant. Huge blowback, even from a predecessor. But the reaction was much bigger, more aggressive than expected.
People calling her from far away, her sons worried about her safety. She even talked to the assistant police chief about watching her house.
She was out at meetings constantly, her 94-year-old mother worrying. She was so stressed she missed meals, her psoriasis flared up.
And she wasn't taking her prescribed treatments. Instead, she treated a recent COVID infection with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which Trump promoted after refusing the vaccine.
Yeah, the source recounts her feeling like, she didn't need the stress, could have been home watching Yellowstone.
But she felt she had no choice but to be involved.
Her motivation, as she explains it in the material, was for her new grandson.
Right. She missed his birth because of hospital restrictions she linked to the pandemic response. And importantly, she describes previously trusting figures like Dr. Fauci.
But now feeling deeply betrayed by institutions she once relied on.
That feeling of institutional betrayal seems like a major driving force for so many people described in these sources.
It really does. The material tells us that what finally cheered Sally up after the whole vigil fiasco was a surprise call from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Greene, newly redrawn into part of Cobb County, came to the next Cobb GOP breakfast.
And Greene's message there, according to the source, it mirrored that sentiment about January 6th being misrepresented. She said most House Republicans skipped the Pelosi memorial.
Instead, Greene held a press conference suggesting the riot was an FBI setup.
She called out Republicans like Cheney and Kinzinger on the Jan 6 committee, saying they need January 6th. They need the lie to continue.
And as the source points out, Greene's comments essentially became the official position of the Republican Party shortly after that.
Yeah, in February, the RNC formally censured Cheney and Kinzinger, labeled their actions on the committee a Democrat-led persecution, and stated ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse.
Which drew swift backlash from establishment Republicans like McConnell, Romney, Collins.
But the source notes an RNC spokeswoman defended it, said it was specifically for the grassroots base, outside of the D.C. bubble.
Wow. That really highlights the growing ideological and cultural chasm within the party described in the material.
It really does.
Okay, so that's Georgia. Did the source material show similar dynamics playing out elsewhere at the local level?
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at another local example of this internal party conflict. Shift over to Arizona, Maricopa County, and the experience of Kathy Petsis.
Kathy, according to the source, felt something was off as soon as she arrived at a legislative district chairs meeting in February 2022.
The seating was unusual, placed her right in the center, and the focus quickly turned to formal complaints against committee members.
Which, the material notes, was kind of a preoccupation of new party members since 2021?
Yeah. The sources list examples of Republicans being censured nationwide for all sorts of reasons in this period. Impeachment votes, supporting infrastructure, gay marriage, a gun bill.
A county chair in Pennsylvania is quoted saying the reason wasn't to do the right thing or whatever, it was something else.
These rebukes, depending on local rules, could strip voting rights, access to campaign funds. Kathy and her allies thought it was a total waste of time.
Tearing each other down instead of prepping for the general election.
But the newer members, according to the account, were eager for these resolutions. They wanted the fight.
And then the second complaint announced that night was against Kathy Petsis herself.
Alleging she violated a bylaw against endorsing non-Republicans because she commented positively on Deborah Stark, a Democrat.
In a technically nonpartisan Phoenix City Council race.
Right. While commenting negatively on Nicole Garcia, a Republican PC who had run against Kathy previously.
Kathy described it as an ambush. She was disgusted. Said after 40 years of grunt work for the party, she's being judged as not a real Republican for not accepting the election lie.
The source says she understood exactly what they were trying to do damage her ahead of the next district chair election.
As she saw it, the new PCs were just following instructions. Purge the rhinos.
The source details the executive session held in March 2022 to deal with the complaint, explicitly mimicking a court proceeding.
Kathy was charged with lending an endorsement to a non-Republican candidate in an election that had a Republican candidate on the ballot. Pretty specific.
And the exchange during this trial is really telling. Kevin Beeman playing the prosecutor.
He questioned Kathy, who is the former county bylaws chairman, about knowing the rules, despite her being a PC for 40 years while he had only been one for 7 months.
They even debated how to pronounce her name, whether the bylaw applied to nonpartisan races.
Beeman presented his case, dictionary definition of endorsement, Kathy's quote from the newspaper article.
Argued it didn't matter the race was nonpartisan because Stark was known as a Democrat, Garcia a Republican PC.
Kathy presented her defense, as described in the sources, that, quote, wasn't an endorsement. She didn't live or vote in Phoenix. Municipal elections are nonpartisan under state law.
And Garcia had tweeted about quitting the GOP anyway.
The questioning from committee members also revealed the climate. One asked if this similar kangaroo court would happen to Kari Lake if she won governor, referencing Lake's past vote for Obama.
The committee chair, the source notes, just set that question aside, didn't touch it.
After deliberation, a confusing vote count with private ballots. The outcome was 16-7 guilty.
Stripping Kathy of her PC voting rights for the upcoming district chair election.
The source mentions Kathy left, noting the irony, these people wanting hand-counted paper ballots but having trouble counting these few votes.
Despite losing her vote, Kathy went to the district chair election later that month. The candidates spoke, including Dan Farley,
who, according to Kathy, had worked with the woman Kathy had rejected as a PC, and who Kathy says told that woman, "We're firing Petzas."
The source describes Farley, real estate broker, Twitter profile full of Soros conspiracy theories, shouting about his dedication, recruiting hundreds of PCs.
And attacking his opponent, Corey Mishkin, saying Mishkin's district turned blue under his leadership.
Kathy's reaction to Farley, described in the source, was that he sounded like a lunatic.
But the audience whooped and clapped and cheered.
Mishkin, in contrast, was sarcastic about the attacks, talked about uniting the party, expanding the tent, avoiding inter-party warfare.
Mishkin corrected Farley on whose precinct actually turned blue.
But the source says the audience just wasn't interested in those details. The vote wasn't even close. Farley won easily.
So the key insight from these local examples, Sally's vigil, Kathy's censure, is how that top-down strategic push for precinct involvement and loyalty to Trump's narratives
translated into very real, often painful, internal party conflicts, and how new participants were effectively using formal party structures to marginalize, even remove, those deemed insufficiently loyal, the rhinos.
And importantly, the sources showed this wasn't just isolated incidents, it was part of a deliberate effort, a changing dynamic.
Yeah, the account details Kathy and her allies' plan to counter this. Recruit new PCs for the August primary who could vote for party leadership in 2023.
But recruiting was tough. People didn't want to associate with a party behaving like this.
And then the source describes these unprecedented challenges to the petitions of the PCs Kathy was recruiting.
Republicans suing other Republicans over petty penmanship issues.
Yeah, the source calls it a stunning waste of resources, a form of bullying. Some recruits just withdrew.
Wow. So the conflict wasn't just ideological, it became intensely personal, tactical.
Exactly. These examples from Cobb County and Maricopa vividly illustrate how the top-down strategy and narrative demands played out on the ground, actively transforming local party structures and marginalizing traditional members.
Right. And this transformation at the local level, it's not happening in a vacuum, is it?
Not at all. It's connected to a larger cultural and ideological movement. Let's zoom out again like the source does and look at the culture of this movement, particularly at CPAC 2022 in Dallas.
The sources describe CPAC, an institution with a long history, as having evolved into a MAGA carnival.
A place where traditional Republicans like Kathy Petzas felt they wouldn't go or wouldn't even be invited anymore.
The atmosphere, the merchandise, it really reflected the movement's slogans, symbols, priorities.
We read about hats, God, Guns, and Trump, Ultra MAGA, bedazzled handgun purses, Stop the Steal board game.
Shirts with provocative images, slogans like, January 6th was a peaceful protest.
The material also highlights the presence of this visible alternative economy. Sponsors catering specifically to those feeling alienated by woke corporations.
Patriot Mobile, a Christian conservative wireless provider. Sovereign data solutions for cloud storage, independent of big tech.
Revere payments for those banned from other platforms. Booths for censorship-free browsers, social networks.
Steve Bannon was there, hosting his War Room podcast live.
The source notes, this was shortly after his conviction for contempt of Congress. And Trump had publicly told him jail was making you a star.
Fans formed an impromptu studio audience right behind his set, even blocking traffic to the main stage.
Bannon brought fans onto the air. Like Melissa, a Hispanic woman wanting to counter the white nationalist idea.
Which was highlighted by Viktor Orban's presence, who'd recently made controversial comments on mixed-race societies.
We also heard from Dorothy, who came because knowledge is power, and she loved what Bannon had done. And a woman from Trinity County, Texas,
who became a PC and poll registrar after learning about the precinct strategy on War Room, dedicating the next 3 years to involvement.
Bannon's goal, as described in the source, was showing listeners they weren't alone, reinforcing that local involvement was the right thing to do. He told his crew, turn the cameras on the audience more.
After the show, Bannon spent hours working the rope line, signing autographs, taking photos.
He understood, the source says, that CPAC was these people's vacation, how they chose to spend their money, similar to joining the precinct strategy.
He saw the getting out and doing as crucial to the movement.
Connected it to the camaraderie, the purpose it offered, so it was maybe to older individuals whose social worlds might have shrunk.
He called them hobbits, but noted there was a shit ton of them, a humble but numerous force on the ground.
Bannon was convinced, the source states, that Kari Lake's victory in the Arizona primary wouldn't have been possible without this surge of engagement driven by the precinct strategy.
He saw Lake as the future of the movement, introduced her at the CPAC gala where she wore a silver gown.
And he declared, we're at war. His keynote speech, described in the source, framed the political situation in really stark terms, called the Biden administration illegitimate.
Emphasized the opportunity to shatter the Democratic Party as a national political institution by taking over everything from school boards to election boards, legislatures.
He even used provocative language, saying they'd give MSNBC's focus on democracy, a democracy suppository, on November 8th.
Clarifying he meant they'd shove it up their ass.
Wow. Yeah. Talk about charged rhetoric.
On the final day of CPAC, Kari Lake spoke as a warm-up for Trump. Walked out to dramatic stock music.
Her rhetoric, according to the source, invoked this sense of divine purpose, saying God had chosen them to save the republic.
That she had won an epic battle in Arizona, driving a stake through the heart of the McCain machine, even mimed a stabbing motion.
So what this section reveals is the crucial role of these cultural hubs, these alternative information ecosystems, shared grievances, in fueling this movement at the grassroots.
It's not just about policy or traditional politics. It's about identity, community, a sense of fighting a common enemy.
Exactly. And speaking of shared identity, belief systems, the sources describe another fascinating, unexpected phenomenon that emerged at Trump rallies.
Right. Before his speeches, a video played. Dark themes, dramatic stock music described as uplifting, dramatic, epic.
Trump started using this music to end his speeches, too.
And at a rally in Ohio, the sources detail something unexpected happening as the music played.
People in the front section started raising their arms, pointing their index fingers.
Trump's team was initially mystified. What was this gesture?
The source introduces the group behind it. Negative 48, identified as an offshoot of QAnon led by Michael Brian Protzman.
The material explains they use a form of numerology, gematria, derived from Hebrew tradition, to decode messages from Q. The name negative 48 means opposite of evil.
Their beliefs, as described by group members in the source, well, they include using numerology to find hidden meanings, in Trump's words, his rally playlist.
Belief in dead people that are still alive.
And a view of the world as having gone terribly wrong, a disaster. Mandatory shots, fear of the flu, people being muzzled.
The source mentions they'd previously gathered for JFK Jr.'s resurrection, shifted to attending Trump rallies when that didn't happen.
At rallies, they'd link arms, dance, sometimes got them in trouble with the Green Men, the event staff, caused unease for Trump's team.
Group members expressed their views in striking quotes. Julie McDaniel said the gesture was about the need for the truth to come out, about government deceit, the theft of an election, called the rally her church.
Melissa Cole said they were standing for the 2020 election, which was stolen. People didn't want to talk about the evidence they'd studied.
Alan Andrews spoke about knowing things not released to public, believing the enemy would be dealt with by the military, NSA surveilling everyone through smart devices, media as television to program minds.
Mickey Larson Olson, an Air Force veteran, shared even more extreme views, stating military tribunals and executions for treason were already happening.
She'd been convicted for defying police on January 6th, called the officers traitors, said execution for treason is what the Constitution demands.
Kelly Hees explained the pointing finger gesture as pointing to God, linked it to Trump's words about bowing to God and God alone, believing they shouldn't wait for a savior because God is within, aiming for heaven on earth right now.
The mystery of the gesture got amplified online. Some linked it to the QAnon slogan, WWG1WGA.
Where we go one, we go all.
Others compared the outstretched arms to a Nazi salute. Then came that strange coincidence described in the source.
The same stock music used by Trump had been put on Spotify by a Finnish man with the title WWG1WGA.
Which, of course, was seen by QAnon followers as a coded message from Trump himself.
Trump's team, according to the source, went into damage control, claimed coincidence, ordered event staff, the Green Men, to stop QAnon signs, apparel, and the hand gesture at future rallies.
Despite this, the sources note Trump's rally rhetoric consistently focused on turning the cameras on the crowd, the people.
Framing the MAGA movement as fighting sick, sinister, and evil people from within our own country, declaring the nation belongs to you, the crowd.
This section really brings into focus how deeply intertwined alternative information ecosystems and specific, sometimes fringe belief systems can become with a political movement.
Shaping its culture, its public expression. It shows a movement fueled not just by political strategy, but by a powerful sense of shared identity, grievances, and a collective understanding of reality that exists outside traditional media and political structures.
Moving from the culture to the concrete, let's return to the tactics on the ground described in the sources, specifically focusing on election administration, or election integrity, as it's often framed.
Back in Cobb County, Georgia, Sally Grubbs was organizing poll watcher training.
As the sources explain, Georgia law requires poll watchers to be trained, but county parties set the content.
Sally's friend Pam Reardon developed the course, informed by experts on the state's new voting law, SB 202.
Which critics, the source notes, called Jim Crow 2.0.
Due to restrictions like reduced absentee ballot request time, heightened ID requirements, banning mailing applications to all voters, eliminating most drop boxes.
Giving the legislature more power over local election boards, making it harder to extend voting hours.
And banning serving refreshments to waiting voters.
Sally had a personal connection to that refreshment ban, having documented left-leaning groups providing snacks in 2020, which she felt should have been illegal, and now was.
The training itself, as described in the sources, was very detailed. Taught trainees their new powers under SB 202. Provided checklists for spotting irregularities.
Even down to checking serial numbers on zip ties securing ballot carriers.
Sally advised trainees to expect election officials to be leery, but stressed politeness, a pleasant demeanor, said they weren't anyone's enemy.
Except maybe the food truck people.
Right. The sources note that while Pam's slideshow image was of bipartisan harmony, the trainees' attitudes expressed in the room were clearly different.
The constraints on poll watchers were covered, too. No interfering while voting, take pictures of cars, but not talking to or confronting voters.
Trainee concerns, like Mike Wilkins wanting to staff precincts more prone to problems, specifically suggesting sending watchers from whiter, richer North Cobb to more diverse South Cobb.
It highlights the underlying suspicion driving this effort, as presented in the material.
They joked, according to the source, about Democrats sending poll watchers, suggesting they were under the tables or paid by George Soros.
With specific dollar amounts mentioned. $20-40 hour for watchers, $40 for absentee ballots.
Mike Wilkins shared a story about seeing alleged ballot harvesting in his neighborhood, confronting the young man, expressed frustration from his 2020 experience about the limits of poll watching.
Felt like he was just watching a mugging and all we're doing is taking a description. Wished he had interfered if asked to leave a poll.
Pam tried to reassure them, saying problems could be addressed right away with attorneys, going to sheriff, not waiting for a lame Secretary of State.
Sally understood their frustration, linked it back to her own 2020 experience chasing that shredding truck with her friend Susan Knox.
And feeling helpless when nothing happened.
That moment, chasing the truck, changed both their lives, but set them on very different paths, according to the sources.
The source introduces Susan Knox, who had encouraged Sally to run, but was no longer involved in the county party. Susan's path led her deep into QAnon and other fringe theories.
We learned about Susan's current beliefs from the sources. The person in the White House is a body double or clone.
Trump is busting a trafficking ring harvesting children for adrenochrome.
The plandemic was staged by elites to take down Trump.
Vaccines contain microchips making people transhumans.
FEMA detention centers are coming for her.
The sources describe Susan having spent hours online, letting her business atrophy, opening her home and wallet to election fraud hunters like Jovan Pulitzer and Patrick Byrne, groups like True the Vote.
When they left without proving fraud, she felt used, let down, gave up on politics for something bigger, something supernatural.
Her hope, as she explains in the material, is Trump is coming back soon, the election will be decertified.
A quantum voting system is coming.
A transformation of the whole world. Federal Reserve, fiat currency, going away for a gold standard. She sees it as biblical. That's when she'll believe that we've won.
That's quite a contrast. Sally, in contrast, wasn't waiting for a miracle or a supernatural transformation.
No, she was never giving up on politics. Even with the long nights, the frustration, she felt the helplessness from 2020 was what the party was now organizing to overcome through poll watchers gathering evidence for lawsuits.
Sally quoted Matthew 6.34 about not worrying about tomorrow, believed they couldn't be inactive from fear.
She stressed politeness, but also stated that seeing somebody doing something wrong with ballots on a mass scale is worthy of confrontation.
Linked it to her view of January 6th as a failure to redress grievances from ignoring a populace saying something happened.
The source concludes this section by stating Sally is done trusting the system, thinks nobody else should either. Nothing, she felt, could convince her to trust elections again. There was no going back.
So the key insight here is how that intense focus on election integrity, fueled by deep distrust after 2020, manifested in tangible efforts like organizing poll watchers.
And how individuals like Sally and Susan, starting from a similar point of frustration, could end up on such dramatically different paths.
One doubling down on political action within a distrusted system.
The other retreating into alternative beliefs.
Finally, let's look at the outcomes of all this. The strategic push, local conflict, cultural shift, tactical effort. Let's return to Arizona on primary night, August 2nd, 2022.
The scene is the Taylor Robson watch party at the Arizona Biltmore.
The initial mood, according to the sources, was electric. Karen Taylor Robson, the mainstream conservative alternative to Kari Lake, had an early lead.
Kathy Petz has arrived late, but felt this sense of optimism, seeing friends who were formerly rivals embracing, reflecting a spirit of respectful disagreements.
Kathy felt her old district, old LD28, was alive and well, filled with people who work hard, give money, and get people elected. Said if that's the establishment, they'd take it. All day long.
A friend, the source notes, called the election an IQ test for America.
But as the night wore on, the results slowed. Taylor Robson's lead began to dwindle.
Kathy started to show concern, realizing she hadn't reclaimed enough PC seats in the primary to oust Dan Farley, feared he'd now run for state chair.
Then came Kathy's "oh my God" moment, described in the source, getting a text from a friend on the Taylor Robson campaign.
Confirmed the lead wouldn't hold.
The sources explained the pattern in the returns. Trump had told supporters to vote only on Election Day, not by mail.
Early and mail-in votes leaned Taylor Robson, but the Election Day votes, counted later, heavily favored Kari Lake, allowing her to catch up and overtake.
Kathy initially wanted Taylor Robson not to concede, wait for every vote, said Lake wouldn't concede if the roles were reversed.
But her friend Derek, who'd already resigned his district chair to avoid dealing with the new PCs, immediately saw the writing on the wall. Lake would win.
Then news came from another friend, Matt. The MAGA candidates had swept the Arizona primaries.
Mark Fincham, the oath keeper and election denier endorsed by Trump, beat Bo Lane for Secretary of State. Another election denier won the Attorney General primary.
This, according to the sources, mirrored a nationwide pattern, with the exception of Georgia's governor and Secretary of State races.
The GOP primary electorate consistently followed Trump's endorsements, picked the most MAGA candidates, expecting the red wave to carry them to victory in November.
The reactions to this outcome described in the sources were just stark. Derek declared, "The party is hopeless."
Matt pushed back, saying the worst thing they could do was give up.
And Kathy's response was deeply emotional, as recounted in the source. She was tearing up, saying, "I'm going to be sick. This can't be happening."
Had bitter reflections on figures like Lindsey Graham, John McCain, called Trump such a cancer. The source says she mouthed, "I hate Trump."
She thought about the prospect of dealing with the insufferable party members who would now be campaigning for Kari Lake.
Her conclusion, the source says, was firm. Heartbreaking, really. I can't be a PC in this.
Wow. So the key insight from the primary results section is the concrete electoral consequence of the shifts detailed in the sources.
Yeah. The strategic push, local battles, cultural forces, it all culminated in primary outcomes that elevated Trump-endorsed election-denying candidates,
Demonstrating the success of that bottom-up transformation.
and leaving many traditional party members feeling defeated, alienated.
This section really brings home the electoral consequences of the shifts we've discussed throughout this deep dive. The top-down strategy, the local transformation and conflict, the cultural forces, the focus on election administration.
It all culminated in a primary outcome that elevated Trump-endorsed election-denying candidates and left traditional party members just in despair. It's a powerful illustration of how a political party can fundamentally change from within.
And the profound impact that has on the individuals who've dedicated their lives, their energy to it.
Absolutely.
So this deep dive into the source material has painted a truly multifaceted picture, hasn't it?
It really has.
We've seen the strategic push from the top to take over the party from the ground up, the intensely personal transformation and conflict within local party ranks, traditional members clashing with newcomers focused on loyalty, specific narratives.
The cultural forces, the belief systems fueling the movement nationally, and the very tangible tactical efforts focused on election administration integrity on the ground.
And finally, the personal costs. The electoral outcomes of these shifts, the success of Trump-aligned candidates in primaries, and the resulting despair for some longtime party members.
These sources show us a party wrestling with fundamental questions about its own identity, about truth, loyalty, even about the very nature of political engagement in an era of eroding trust.
Eroding trust in institutions, sharply diverging narratives.
It leaves us with a provocative thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Drawn directly from the contrasting experiences we've explored here.
Yeah. In a political environment where trust in traditional structures is breaking down, and where shared beliefs, even fringe ones, form powerful alternative communities, how do individuals decide where to focus their energy? Where do they find meaning?
Do they try to fight within the old structures they no longer trust? Do they retreat into alternative communities' belief systems? Or do they just wait as some hope for some kind of transformative